Sophia was severely allergic to shellfish, and everyone in the family knew it. At her own wedding reception, her mother-in-law quietly removed that one detail from the caterer's order form. Within minutes of the first course being served, Sophia's throat began to close, and her husband, watching his mother's face across the room, already knew exactly what she had done. Before we begin tonight, if stories like this move you, take a second and press that subscribe button, and leave a comment below telling me if you've ever had a mother-in-law who made you feel like your needs simply didn't matter. It genuinely helps this story reach the people who need to hear it. Now let's begin, because what happened at Sophia's own wedding reception had been quietly building for almost 2 years. Sophia had known Michael for nearly 3 years before he finally proposed. A slow, steady love built on quiet dinners and long phone calls during the months he traveled for work. She was a graphic designer, warm and easygoing, the kind of woman who remembered small details about everyone she met. She'd also carried a severe shellfish allergy since childhood, one serious enough that a single bite could send her straight to the hospital, something she'd learned to mention carefully and early at every gathering she attended. Michael had learned this about her within their first month of dating, and he never once let it slip his mind at any dinner, any holiday, any celebration they attended together since. Patricia, Michael's mother, had never been openly cruel to Sophia, at least not in front of anyone who might notice. She was polished and polite in public, always offering warm hugs at the door, always complimenting Sophia's outfit before quickly turning the conversation toward something else entirely. But underneath that polish sat something colder, a quiet resentment Sophia had learned to recognize, slowly, over 2 years of careful, measured interactions. Patricia mentioned once, almost lightly, how exhausting it must be to plan meals around so many restrictions. She brought it up again, months later, at a family barbecue, then again at Thanksgiving. The same comment dressed up slightly differently each time, always landing with the same quiet sting underneath it. Michael rarely noticed the full weight of these comments. He loved his mother deeply, and he genuinely believed she simply had an old-fashioned, no-nonsense way of speaking her mind, nothing more complicated than that. Whenever Sophia gently mentioned feeling judged for her allergy, Michael would tell her she was reading too much into things, that his mother didn't mean anything by it, that she'd grown up in a generation less familiar with severe food allergies. Sophia stopped bringing it up after a while, not because it stopped bothering her, but because she didn't want tension with Patricia to become tension inside her own marriage before it even began. She told herself Patricia simply needed more time. What Sophia did not yet understand was that Patricia had already quietly decided, somewhere deep down, that Sophia's allergy was less a medical reality and more an inconvenience she resented having to accommodate. The wedding planning itself had gone smoothly for the most part, small disagreements here and there over flowers and seating charts, nothing that felt truly alarming to either Sophia or Michael. Patricia had insisted, quite firmly, on handling the final details with the caterer herself, framing it as a generous gift to the young couple, one less thing for them to worry about during an already stressful season. Sophia had hesitated briefly, some quiet instinct telling her to double-check the details herself, before ultimately deciding it felt petty to question Patricia's genuine offer to help. She sat down with Patricia weeks earlier and told her clearly, plainly, exactly what needed to go on that caterer's form regarding her allergy, watching Patricia nod and write it down herself in careful handwriting. The morning of the wedding arrived bright and clear, Sophia waking up with the particular nervous excitement of a day she'd looked forward to for months. She stood in front of the mirror in her dress, feeling for the first time in a long while completely at peace, telling herself that whatever small tension existed with Patricia, today was going to be different. Today was going to be the beginning of something warmer between them. Michael knocked gently on her door before the ceremony, telling her she looked beautiful, reminding her that his mother had confirmed everything with the caterer personally, that there was nothing left for Sophia to worry about on this one particular day. The ceremony itself passed in a warm, emotional blur, vows exchanged beneath a simple archway of white flowers, tears from both mothers, laughter from friends who'd known them both for years. Sophia felt lighter than she had in months, walking into the reception hall on Michael's arm, genuinely believing that every small detail of this day had been carefully, lovingly handled. She had absolutely no idea, taking her seat at the head table and smiling out at the room full of people who loved her, that the woman sitting just a few feet away, smiling just as warmly back at her, had quietly made one small decision weeks earlier that was about to turn this entire celebration into something neither of them would ever forget. 3 weeks before the wedding, Patricia had sat at her own kitchen table, with the caterer's order form spread out in front of her, the same form Sophia had carefully filled in by hand during their meeting together. Patricia stared at the section marked Allergy information, Sophia's handwriting, clear and specific. Shellfish, severe, requires an EpiPen on site. She sat with that page for a long time, something tightening in her chest that she didn't fully want to name, before finally deciding, quietly and without telling anyone, that she would retype the form herself before submitting it to the catering company the following morning. Patricia told herself, sitting there with her laptop open, that she wasn't doing anything truly harmful, simply trimming what she saw as an unnecessary complication from an already expensive menu. She'd never fully believed food allergies were as serious as people made them out to be, having grown up in a household where nobody had ever needed anything more than common sense at the dinner table. She retyped the entire form carefully, copying every detail exactly except one, leaving the allergy section completely blank, telling herself Sophia would simply be more careful about what she ate that evening, the way any reasonable person naturally would be at their own wedding. What Patricia did not consider, sitting at her kitchen table congratulating herself on solving a problem that never actually needed solving, was that Michael had personally recommended this particular catering company because a close family friend worked there as an events coordinator. That same coordinator, a woman named Carol, had handled dozens of weddings over the years and had developed a habit of double-checking every allergy note personally before any event, a small professional caution that had nothing to do with Patricia's carefully altered form, sitting unread in her inbox for the moment. The morning of the wedding, Patricia arrived early at the reception hall, greeting the catering staff warmly, walking through the kitchen with the easy confidence of someone who believed she'd already handled every detail perfectly. She glanced briefly at the trays being prepared, the seafood tower positioned proudly near the center of the appetizer table, and felt a small, satisfied flicker of relief that everything appeared to be moving exactly according to her own quiet plan. She had no idea that Carol, the events coordinator, had a habit of personally reviewing allergy forms one final time before service began, a routine she followed at literally every single wedding she'd ever managed. Michael arrived a short while later, dressed and ready, stopping briefly in the kitchen to thank the catering staff personally, the way his own father had always taught him to do. He noticed his mother standing near the appetizer table, unusually quiet, unusually focused on straightening napkins that didn't need straightening, though he thought little of it at the time, simply assuming she was nervous the way any mother might be on her only son's wedding day. He had absolutely no reason yet to suspect that his mother's careful, quiet energy that morning had anything to do with a decision she'd made weeks earlier at her own kitchen table. Guests began arriving throughout the afternoon, filling the reception hall with easy laughter and warm conversation, the seafood tower drawing admiring comments from several relatives who complimented Patricia directly on her elegant menu choices. Patricia accepted each compliment graciously, glancing occasionally toward the head table, where Sophia sat glowing beside Michael, feeling something she didn't fully want to examine too closely settle quietly into her chest each time she looked. If you've ever trusted someone with something deeply personal, only to feel a small nagging doubt you couldn't quite explain, tell me in the comments below. And if you've ever made a decision you told yourself was harmless, only to feel that decision grow heavier the longer you sat with it, don't be afraid to share that here too, because sometimes the smallest choices carry the heaviest consequences. The first course was announced a short while later, servers moving gracefully between tables, plates arriving one by one in front of smiling, hungry guests. Sophia looked down at her own plate, a beautifully plated seafood appetizer resting in front of her, and felt nothing but genuine excitement, completely unaware that the woman who had personally arranged this very menu had quietly ensured, weeks earlier, that not a single person in that kitchen knew about the allergy that was about to put her life in danger within the next few minutes. Sophia lifted her fork and took a small, eager bite of the seafood appetizer, the delicate flavor barely registering before something felt suddenly, unmistakably wrong. A strange tingling started at the back of her throat within seconds, spreading quickly, tightening in a way she recognized instantly from every close call she'd experienced since childhood. She set her fork down immediately, her hand trembling slightly, reaching for Michael's arm beside her, with a growing panic she couldn't quite hide. "Michael," she said, her voice already strained. "Something's wrong. I think there was shellfish in that." Michael turned toward her instantly, his own face draining of color the moment he saw hers, recognizing immediately the same warning signs he'd learned to watch for since they first started dating. "Where's your EpiPen?" he asked quickly, already reaching for her small clutch purse on the table, his hands moving faster than his mind could fully process what was actually happening. Sophia's breathing had already begun to change, shallow and quick, her throat visibly tightening now in front of the nearest few guests, who had started to notice something was seriously wrong at the head table. The reception hall shifted instantly from warm celebration into sudden chaos, guests standing up from nearby tables, someone calling out for a doctor, another guest already dialing for an ambulance without waiting to be asked. Michael found the EpiPen with shaking hands, administering it exactly the way Sophia had taught him years earlier, his own heart pounding as he watched his new wife struggle to breathe on what was supposed to be the happiest day of both their lives. Patricia stood frozen several feet away near the appetizer table, her face pale, her hands gripping the edge of the table tightly, saying absolutely nothing while the chaos unfolded directly in front of her. Carol, the events coordinator, rushed over the moment she heard the commotion, immediately recognizing the signs of a severe allergic reaction from years of catering experience. "Does she have a shellfish allergy?" Carol asked urgently, already reaching for her own phone to call emergency services, her professional instincts kicking in instantly. Michael nodded quickly, his voice tight with fear. "Severe. It's on her form. We made sure of it weeks ago." Carol's expression shifted into something confused, then deeply concerned, as she pulled out her tablet right there at the table, scrolling quickly through the digital order form her staff had prepared that morning. "Michael, I need you to look at this," Carol said carefully, turning the tablet toward him, her voice suddenly serious, in a way that cut through even the surrounding panic. The allergy section on the form was completely blank. No mention of shellfish, no mention of an EpiPen requirement. Nothing at all indicating any restriction whatsoever for the bride. Michael stared at the screen, his confusion deepening rapidly into something far more troubling. "That's not possible," he said, his voice shaking now for reasons that had nothing to do with the emergency itself. "Sophia filled that form out herself weeks ago. I watched her do it." Carol's face grew even more careful as she pulled up the submission history on her tablet, tracing the form back to exactly who had entered the final version into the system. "This version was submitted 3 weeks ago," she said slowly, watching Michael's expression change with every word. "Under your mother's name." The reception hall around them seemed to blur into background noise as Michael turned slowly, his eyes finding his mother standing frozen near the appetizer table, her face pale and unreadable, watching paramedics rush through the front doors toward his gasping wife. Michael felt something cold settle deep into his chest, a realization forming slowly and painfully as he looked at his mother across that crowded, panicked room. Sophia was still struggling to breathe beside him, paramedics now kneeling at her side, checking her vitals with careful, practiced urgency, while somewhere in the back of Michael's mind, 3 weeks of quiet conversations with his mother about handling the caterer herself suddenly rearranged themselves into something far darker than he had ever once considered. And as the paramedics carefully lifted Sophia onto a stretcher, Michael turned fully toward his mother, his voice steady despite the fear still gripping his chest, and asked the one question he was terrified to hear the real answer to. "Did you take her allergy off that form, Mom?" Michael asked, his voice low and unsteady, cutting through the chaos still swirling around them as paramedics wheeled Sophia carefully toward the door. Patricia's mouth opened, then closed again, her carefully composed face finally beginning to crack under the weight of her son's direct stare. "Michael, I just thought," she started, her voice barely above a whisper, though the words died somewhere in her throat before she could finish the sentence. "I need a real answer right now," Michael said, his voice trembling slightly, though it carried a firmness Patricia had genuinely never heard from him before in his entire life. "I thought she was being overly dramatic about it," Patricia finally admitted, her voice small and shaking now, the weight of the ambulance lights flashing through the reception hall windows, making her own words sound suddenly, horrifyingly real to her for the first time. "I didn't think one appetizer would actually—" She stopped herself, unable to finish, watching her son's face shift from disbelief into something far colder than she had ever seen directed at her before. "You could have killed her," Michael said quietly, each word landing like a small, devastating blow. "On our wedding day, Mom, in front of everyone we love." Michael didn't wait for his mother's response. He turned and rushed toward the ambulance, climbing in beside Sophia just as the paramedics began closing the doors, holding her trembling hand tightly while they raced toward the hospital. Sophia's breathing had started to steady slightly with the medication, though her eyes, wide and frightened, searched his face for answers he wasn't ready to give her yet, not until he understood the full truth himself. "What happened?" she managed to whisper, her voice still hoarse and strained. Michael squeezed her hand gently, choosing his next words with careful, painful precision. "We'll talk about it once you're safe. I promise you that." Sophia spent the next several hours under careful observation at the hospital, the medication working exactly as it should, her breathing gradually returning to normal, while doctors monitored her closely for any further reaction. Michael stayed by her side the entire time, his phone buzzing repeatedly, with messages from relatives asking what had happened, though he ignored every single one, focused entirely on the woman lying in that hospital bed who had nearly lost her life at her own wedding reception. When Sophia finally felt strong enough to talk, Michael told her everything: the blank allergy form, his mother's quiet admission in the middle of the chaos, the full weight of what Patricia had quietly decided to do weeks earlier without either of them knowing. Sophia listened in stunned, exhausted silence, processing the fact that the woman she had spent 2 years trying so carefully to please had knowingly, deliberately put her life at risk over something as small as an inconvenient allergy note. "She knew," Sophia finally said quietly, more to herself than to Michael. "She knew exactly what could happen, and she did it anyway." Michael nodded, his jaw tight, his own anger still simmering just beneath the surface of his careful, steady voice. "She's not getting away with pretending this was some innocent mistake," he said firmly. "Not this time." Patricia called the following morning, her voice shaking, offering an apology that felt, even to her, painfully inadequate given what had actually happened. Michael listened quietly before answering, his voice calm but absolutely unwavering. "I need real space from you, Mom, until you can genuinely understand what you almost took from us," he said. "This isn't something I can simply forgive because you're my mother. Sophia could have died." Patricia had no real response to that, the silence on the other end of the line stretching long and uncomfortable, the first real consequence she had ever faced for a lifetime of quietly deciding her own comfort mattered more than anyone else's safety. The weeks that followed brought careful, deliberate distance rather than any quick, easy reconciliation. Sophia recovered fully, physically at least, though something in her had shifted permanently, a clarity she hadn't fully had before about exactly how far Patricia had been willing to go. Michael stood firmly beside his wife through every difficult conversation that followed, refusing to let his mother's tears or excuses soften what she had actually done. Months later, Patricia finally began the slow, uncomfortable work of real accountability, though Sophia made clear that trust, this time, would have to be earned back completely, one honest year at a time, rather than simply given away again. If this story reminded you that real love means protecting the people you love, even from your own family. Do me a small favor and subscribe before you go, so you never miss the next story like this one.